Welcome. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is George Rudge,
And I am Aaron Savage.
and this is the third episode of the podcast with no name. Still to be confirmed. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let us know. There will be an incredibly witty and catchy name at some point. But anyway, in the meantime, we shall continue. So, Aaron, the quote of the week this week, the theme for this show. I'll start with the quote. So, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. And that is a little number from Seneca. Any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really like the quote. I think Seneca is one of the Stoic philosophers who has been quite vocal and has like kind of a running theme around practicing poverty, showing restraint, not wanting too much. So I do really like it. I think the quote makes you think. It kind of hits you a little bit. Um, in that we all want things all the time. There's always something that people are after, and it makes you check back a little bit, and it gives you a little bit of a reality check on yourself and your own thinking. So yeah, I really like it, mate. What about you? Why did you choose this quote this week?
Um, so I think this one's, like you say, it's sort of what it means to you, and this one resonates with me quite a lot. I think I can only focus on so many things at once. So having something to follow that means that I can reduce the amount of the inputs, if you like, and only focus on the stuff that really matters.
Mm.
Really does help, and almost sort of linking into sort of a gratitude aspect as well. There, just around focusing on what really matters, and being able to value what actually matters, and the other things are nice to have, but not essential. Um, I think it's quite important. And we could get onto a right old rant about sort of materialism and that sort of thing in the modern day. But I think it's a nice antidote to that. I think it's a nice antidote to the constant sales and marketing you're bombarded with, and just focus on the things that really matter, sort of friends, family, relationships, that sort of stuff. Um, yeah, I think that's why I chose it, mate.
I like it. I like it. Good work, man.
So, I guess we can sort of flesh out a few more things around this topic. I think one thing that came to my mind as sort of soon as I read this, and I think that ties in nicely, um, is sort of the 80-20 principle. So Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle, um, whatever you may know it as, um, is effectively a law that states that most of the outcomes are driven by a few of the inputs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think his initial assessment of sort of how he came up with it was wealth distribution within within the economy. So he sort of observed that 20% of the population had 80% of the wealth, and vice versa. And it's a relationship you see in everything. Um, you can see it in your day-to-day work. So there'll be 20% of work that really pushes you forward, and probably the 20% of the work your boss is most interested in, and the 80% of it will likely be fluff, filling time. It might not be exactly those percentages, but the sort of theory tends to hold true in most facets of life. But have you sort of noticed the same thing there? Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think for me, especially when I think about at work, there's 100% 20, well, 100% 20%. There is,
100%.
there is 20% of the people that will actually need something from me urgently, then another 80% that just bombard me with questions that they could very easily look up themselves. And it's been this way in pretty much every job, um, that you get no real value from answering them. It just sucks up time. Whereas there's 20% of the people that need something to be done that you can dedicate that time to get their work done, and there's a result that's actually worth it at the end. And as you say, likewise in general with actual topics, I quite like to think of the 80-20 principle when I'm structuring my day. What do I need to kind of get done in my day? Right, what is that 20% that needs to be done today? That's going to make the biggest impact on everything that I'm doing and everything that I need to do for the week, the month, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, nice, nice. I definitely sort of agree. I try and do the same sort of thing. I've got a very limited to-do list. It's a digital one, which isn't the best because you can sort of manipulate it a little bit, but it shouts at you if you add more than a couple of tasks on it for the day. So it's all about just obviously prioritizing those key tasks. But I guess we can give that as a bit more a bit of a tip and a trick near the end of the show. Sneak preview of that one there. So when I sort of initially asked you your thoughts for the quote, mate, you mentioned practicing poverty. Now, I've got a rough idea of what that is, and I know it's something that quite a few of the Stoics mention. In particular, I can think of Marcus Aurelius mentions it. But what is that? What does that mean?
So there's another quote from Seneca that I quite like. So I'm going to do another quote for
Ooh, two.
the listener. And he basically says that we should set aside a certain number of days during which you'll be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself all the while, is this the condition that I feared? So essentially, in modern terms, not going out wearing the nicest clothes that you got, looking the best, not having the latest technology, using something maybe a little bit older and not the latest iPhone or something like that, and realizing, you know what, life isn't that bad, not having all of the fancy things that everyone thinks you need. And in terms of, for what we're obviously talking about with minimalism, it makes you realize that you don't need to have every single thing that you maybe sit there and go, that'd be quite nice to have. Ooh, I want to buy that from Amazon because I can get it later today or I can get it tomorrow. You don't have to do that. You don't have to buy everything. You don't have to have everything, because what you've got and what you're living with now, and maybe even if things went wrong and you've come into financial troubles and you couldn't buy really a lot at all or things like that, it's not an issue. And that's kind of where I see that, and how I interpret that quote from Seneca as well, is just that it's not what you fear could happen if you change job, if you couldn't suddenly afford what you are used to having. Life isn't that much different. Life isn't that bad. You can still live like it. You can still have a good life. And a lot of the things that we worry about and we think about are exactly that. They're in our head. It's all thought up problems. And so that's kind of where I take that, and how I interpret the whole poverty aspect of things. And, you know, at the end of the day, there are some people in the world who are struggling financially or things like that. And, you know, I'm not saying that, oh, well, it's not that bad. Just kind of get on with it, because different people's circumstances are very, very different. But for me and you, in a position that we are, we're not super well off, but we're also not struggling. If things just got 20% worse or 50% worse, is that going to be the worst thing in the world? Could we still live and have quite a comfortable life? Yeah, we probably could. And I think that's just, it's remembering that. It's remembering that at the end of the day, for all the stress, for all the worry, it's not always as bad at the end if something does happen that you're worrying about than what you think it will.
Yeah, yeah. I think that nicely summarises it, mate. I do. I think it's a nice way of looking at it. And like you say, would things be significantly worse? Like, would it be to the point where you couldn't carry on? Probably not. And it's almost just coming to that realization, and it gives you a nice bit of clarity when you're trying to make decisions as well. Just, okay, right, well, what is the worst that can happen in this situation? What have I got to gain? What have I got to lose? What does that actually impact? And also helps you to focus on the things that do matter
Yeah.
most, really.
Yeah.
Can you keep a roof over your head? Can you keep food on the table? Yeah, fine. Well, in which case we can forego the other things, you know?
And on that point, just quickly, one thing as a personal thing that I've kind of noticed recently, I'd say, is that with the whole cost of living crisis in the UK, everything's more expensive. We've been looking at ways that we can cut back. One of those ways is in our food shopping. So we used to get a food shop delivered once a week from Sainsbury's. Didn't have to go out, didn't have to go shopping. It was nice and easy, it was nice and convenient. Now I'm going to Lidl on my lunch break. People may sit there, and people probably have. I know me and you, we've shopped in like Lidl and Aldi and things when we were at university, so we know it's nowhere near as bad as what some people think it is. But that is just a step that people assume could be really bad. Oh no, I'm not going to have the Sainsbury's quality anymore. Well, you know what? Lidl is just as good. There's not any problem, and it's cheaper. You're saving money, which is what we're doing now. Even the worst case scenario, if we just ate the same thing every single day for dinner, it's still food in our bellies. It's still nutrients. It's still exactly what we need to survive. We're not going to be struggling off of it. We're not going to be sitting there miserable because we're eating the same thing every day. Yeah, it may not be the ideal situation, but at least we've got food.
Yeah.
And that step down from having the luxury of picking what we want and all this type of things, because we don't have to worry about the bills as much, to even now where we're tightening our belt, but we're still getting to pick what we want. There's a rung below that of just having the same thing every day. Chicken and rice, for example, plain chicken and rice every day. Is it the most interesting meal? No, it's not. Could you do it? Yes, you can. Then there's a rung below that at the end of the day, which is you can't afford food. So
Yeah.
going from one extreme to the other, there are bits in the middle, and that's what people don't tend to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to reiterate your point that you sort of said earlier, like we're not in the worst position, and we could, as I think is probably fair to say, across the average of the population, lose things, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. But there is obviously part of the population that are really in dire straits, and we are not saying by any stretch like, oh, stiff upper lip, get on with it, you'll be fine. Absolutely not. Like, society should be there to help those people in every way that we can. But yeah, completely on board with what you just said there, mate. And I think it almost links back to, I think if we just go back to that sort of quote initially at the beginning, just to sort of reframe a little bit around, it's not the man that has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. It's almost that interpretation of what you've got, isn't it? It's in everything we've said, like you can survive, you can thrive with less, but it's almost just appreciating the smaller things and the things that you do have more. Like the grass is always greener, and there's never a truer statement that has been said.
100%.
And I think that's only ever more prevalent now. I know we banged on the door of social media last week, so we're going to do it again this week. But like with all the shiny, glossy ads out there trying to make you sort of feel like you're not quite worth it, you're not quite sufficient, there's a need that you need to fulfill conveniently through buying their product. I think it's important to take a step back, appreciate what you do have, appreciate what, like we both drive cars, fantastic. And we've both got cars. Yours is fancier than mine. Mine's a bit older, a bit rustier, but it still gets us from A to B.
A car's a car.
A car's a car, and you could say the same thing about lots of things. We both live in absolutely fine conditions. No issues there. So it's looking at what you do have and is appreciating them for what they are. Really, I think is another sort of key takeaway that I sort of take from that.
No, 100%. Completely agree with everything you said. Yeah, at the end of the day, you can want as much as you like. It doesn't make you happier. It doesn't make you better off.
Yeah, and I think that's another very, very good point. It does not make you happier. If anything, I think it would probably do the worst, do the opposite.
Yeah, there is another saying. I don't know who said it, but it's like the things you own end up owning you. I think it might actually be at a Fight Club.
Right.
So I mean, it's a questionable film to take your morals off of, but it's a valid point. At the end of the day, the more stuff you have, how much more worried you get when you leave the house or anything like that it might get stolen. How much more pressed are you if something happens to it? Do you get angry when something breaks because it cost you that extra bit of money and you only bought it because that's the new thing that you've got to have? At the end of the day, the sentiment behind it stands. You know, like the things you do own do, if you actually think about it, they dictate how you behave. They dictate your attitude and your outlook on life to some extent. It's just something to think about. It's a very interesting meditation, I guess, to have and just ponder for a week, which is at the end of the day why we're doing this podcast. So it gives us something to think about and what we can then focus on.
Yeah, yeah, and that's bang on, mate. I think like for example, just to illustrate your point there, like a mortgage on a big house or on a house that's possibly a little bit bigger than your budget allows, like that absolutely dictates your decisions. That absolutely dictates whether you leave your job to go and pursue something you want to do with the risk of being out of work in the meantime.
Yeah.
That dictates your decisions, like you say, at the food shop each week, because you're not going to be buying M&S every week when you're up against it. And linking back to sort of a previous point, that's only going to become more and more apparent, I think, in this coming months and years for the UK. It seems very doom and gloom out there at the minute, but it doesn't have to be that bad. Focus on what you've got. And cut out the things that you don't necessarily need.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a very good point to kind of end that part of the conversation is focus on what you have. Yes, it could seem all doom and gloom. If we pay attention to everything that everyone's saying all the time, this country is going to be in the gutter, apparently. Well, I mean, it's not far out of it anyway. But it's not. It could be 10 times worse. It could be 50 times worse than what things actually are. If we focus on what we have, you know what? You may just find that little bit of peace that you can go, what happens, happens. That is the hand that I've been dealt. I'm just going to embrace it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so moving on then. Have you got anything else that you kind of like to do, or any tips and tricks for the audience that is related to this at all?
I have a couple. So, sort of going back to what we gave our sneak preview of earlier, I think both me and yourself, and what we've discussed in the past, like to take this approach with our work day to day. So, identifying the real few key tasks that are most important to our day, and making sure we nail those. Above all else, get those done first thing. Get them out of the way. That way, you've had a productive day, and it's not even lunchtime yet. And I think if I compare it to sort of how I've worked previously, I'm infinitely more productive now than I was focusing on doing less, as in less tasks. The bigger stuff, the stuff that you don't necessarily want to put at the top of your to-do list, but I'm ever so much more productive now that I've do that. And is that something that you sort of use as well, Aaron?
Yeah, 100%. Could not. Literally, it's been a game changer at work. Trying to focus on that, like 20% of stuff, and also to kind of spin off to that, another law, I guess, or whatever that we both kind of follow, I believe, is Parkinson's law. The more time you give to something as well, the bigger in gravity, and it will take you that long. If you give it an hour, it will take you an hour. If you give it 10 minutes, it will take you 10 minutes. In terms of like the minimalism and that approach to things as well, I think that kind of ties in quite nicely as well, as just another little trick that people can use, that if you've got something to do, you're focusing on the 20%. If you sit down at the beginning of the day and say, I'm going to work on this and get it done by 10 o'clock in the morning, you can get it done by 10 o'clock in the morning. And then you can focus on some other bits that maybe your boss wants you to do that you don't think is as important, it's not going to make as big of an impact for you and your role that you're doing, but they want something done, get what you need to done first, set the time that you actually need to do it, and do it in that time, focus. Then you can do other bits and bobs that other people kind of need you to do that falls into the 80% category of Pareto's law. Like, they work quite well together.
Yeah, and I think so. Is it safe to say that you probably came across that in the same place I did first in sort of Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week?
Most likely.
So combining those two things, I think it's chapter 3 or something like that.
That is specific.
But the only reason I know that is because I pick up that book fairly frequently, at least a couple of times a year, and read just those 2 bits. So I literally pick it up just for that. So read those 2 bits and then put it down again, just because I know that helps. And
sorry, Tim, he does like the rest of your book as well.
Yeah. But Tim.
If you're listening, Tim, don't worry. No offense to the rest of your book. Them 2 bits though.
Yeah. Brilliant. If Tim's listening, we're doing well. We're doing well by episode 3. And I guess just some other sort of key bits. Something, I think this is probably more of a takeaway than anything else, but I can turn it into a bit of a tip and trick, is so for weightlifting we have to go through like competition prep phases, if you like, and I walk around at body weight that is a few kilos up of my normal weight class. So going into competition, I basically have to restrict what I'm eating quite severely. Mm-hmm. As a lot of people will, they'll be on diets to try and hit goals, or whether that's just the way you look, or try and hit a weight, or whatever it may be. But I think that encapsulates it quite nicely, of the going without. And the first week is tough, but after that it eases up quite nicely. So maybe a tip or trick in there. I'm not saying necessarily to manipulate diet, but practice going without the things that you think you can go without. And I think just having that mental reset in there. I know obviously you're not watching TV or anything like that before bed, but for example, remove those social media apps for a week. Delete them. You can install them again down the line, but delete them and just sort of see if it makes any difference. And
that ties into that quote that I said earlier from Seneca. At the end, that it's about just practicing it. You don't have to do something permanently. Just practice it. See what it's like, and if you like it, great. Stick with it. If you don't, it's reversible.
Just get a taste for it. Realize that it's not so bad.
Yeah.
Go from there. And then I think the only other last thing that I'd add is a sort of a tip trick. This sort of comes back to that original quote, and it's just almost sitting down each year or each half a year, and just having a bit of a clear out. Everything from whether it be your calendar to your room to your house to your car, everything. Just set aside a weekend, and just clear everything out. Everything you don't need. Do I need this? A nice question if you're stuck on items that you've got, for example, is would I buy this now? And if so, how much for? It gives you a nice context, because I've got loads of stuff. I'm a hoarder, mate, like that. I'm not like Channel 4 stacked to the walls of rubbish, but I just like keeping hold of things because I think they've got material value, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't like to get rid of stuff. But when you actually reframe it as like, right, okay, well, would I actually buy this again? It's like, well, no, it's been in the cupboard for 3 years. I'm not going to buy it again.
Yeah.
Reframes it nicely. So I think just like a buy yearly or sort of once a quarter clear out is quite a nice tip or trick. But,
yeah, I agree. And I think you can apply the principles that we've spoken about in terms of 80-20 and stuff to that as well, in that, is this 20% actually offering me value? And because you will find that of everything, 80% will just be rubbish that you've just got because you've accumulated it. As you say, they're t-shirts that they still fit, so why would I get rid of them? You don't wear them though. They're at the bottom of your drawer. They collect dust. You could get rid of it. So there is then the 20% of where you will sit there and go, oh, actually, I do like that. I do want to use that. You can apply the laws and the principles that we've spoken about earlier into this annual or bi-yearly review, and also with people as well. Like there will be people that just suck value out. And at the end of the day, that you don't need value suckers. You need people who are going to offer value. You need things that are offering you value rather than things that just take everything all the time. And doing these reviews, it kind of helps identify those and lets you know what kind of you need to do.
Yeah, I like that, and the people aspect is definitely one to think about as well. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. All right, so I think that nicely brings us to a close, mate. So we've had a bit of a chat about Fight Club. We've said get rid of all your friends. So that concludes us nicely.
Yeah, we've gone Fight Club, get rid of friends, be poor. That's a solid podcast.
There you go, very inspirational for you today, guys. So that brings us a bit of a close, I think. But this is an important topic, and I think it is definitely something that you can take forward with you, and just helps reframe everything that's going on, really. So definitely something we value, and hopefully you do too. But if you've enjoyed this, give it a like, give it a share, and hopefully we shall see you next week.
Excellent. See you next week, guys.